Welcome everyone, Costin here with the discussion about World of Warcraft Wrath of the Lich King Gearscore. Will it return and what kind of impact it will have on the game? Well, I am most certain that it is going to return. It would have returned regardless of what Blizzard did. It was a part of Wrath of the Lich King on retail for a reason. Because it's easier to make a pug using Gearscore. I mean, why bother with the effort of inspecting someone, trying to determine if they're good or not, when you can just use an add-on that determines that for you. Of course, it's never perfect, but that's how you get ridiculously high Gearscore requirements for things like Nax or Old War or TOC or even ICC. It's because you assume that people are not necessarily going to be great, so you increase the Gearscore requirement in order to make yourself easy. Because what Gearscore really represents, it is the potential power that a particular character has on themselves. And you increase that to assume that people don't necessarily know what they're doing, especially when it's very easy to buy gear. Gold bid runs are likely going to be a thing in Wrath of the Lich King. And you increase it so that regardless of how good someone is or isn't, or how people in a raid are or aren't, you still have enough power to make the bosses an easy cakewalk. That was why people were asking for very high Gearscore requirements in many of the raids in Wrath of the Lich King on retail. But that's not really the purpose of this video. What about heroics? 4K Gearscore requirements for heroics? Are you insane? I mean, the heroics of Wrath of the Lich King are very, very easy. Why would anyone require that? Well, it has to boil down to what people are trying to achieve in heroics in Wrath of the Lich King. Is it gearing? Sure, to an extent, and given that Blizzard may very well delay the release of Nax, Sarfarian, and Malagos for at least a week, people will be doing heroics to a certain degree within the first weeks. Never mind that people can go in Nax and Sunwell gearing or Black Temple gearing and clear it reasonably well, or in quest gearing and clear it reasonably well. But yeah, people will be doing heroics to gear up within the first few weeks. After that, it's just going to be alts and raiders doing heroics, or rather one specific heroic per day, the random daily heroic, which you go to Dalaran. Since we won't have a random dungeon finder in Wrath of the Lich King, you'll go to Dalaran, you'll get the quest, you'll get some badges, you'll do that particular dungeon, and you want it done quickly. So this is where the Gearscore requirement comes in to Wrath of the Lich King dungeons, to Wrath of the Lich King heroics, because the people that will be doing that daily heroic are raiders. They are people who have everything they need. They don't need the gear, they don't need the achievements, or if they need the achievements, they're certainly not going to do it in a pug of people. They're going to make a group in a guild, or they're going to look for specific people or specific classes to get the achievements that they want. But for the most part, raiders will want to do the random daily heroic for the sake of badges. It's not even that they need the gear from badges, is that they can use the gold. I mean, Wrath raiding really pays for itself because you get badges from raiding, but you also get badges from the daily heroic. And you can get quite a few badges from the daily heroic and pay for your consumables, for your enchants, for your gems, even for crafted gear if you so desire. And with Old War, Trial of the Grand Crusader, and Icecrown Citadel, you also get materials that you can use to craft gear, which quite a few people care about. So the random daily heroic is actually something that's very important to a large number of raiders. But raiders don't want to waste their time doing a daily heroic that they don't need for the gear itself. They want to get it done as quickly as possible, because sure, the heroics in Wrath of the Lich King might be easy, might be a cakewalk, might be something you step in and sneeze at the mobs and they fall over, but they can still take a reasonable length of time. You can spend 40 minutes, 50 minutes, even an hour in certain heroics, some of the lengthier ones, or you can get them done in 10, 20 minutes if you have a power group, and that's going to incentivize people to make powerful groups for the sake of the random daily heroic, and hence the Gearscore requirement. Because why bother inspecting people? That's a waste of time. Don't inspect people. Put in a Gearscore requirement, 4K plus Gearscore for daily heroic. Get the powerful group, clear it in 10 minutes, be done for the day. You don't want to spend your time on every day spending 20, 30, 40 minutes on a random daily heroic. You want to get it done as quickly as possible. And that's what the removal of the Dungeon Finder is really going to create, on top of other things. Because the removal of the random Dungeon Finder means you no longer get the badges for a random dungeon. Instead, it's a specific dungeon each and every single day. So for that dungeon, there will be plenty of groups, but for other dungeons, far less so. And even for the dungeon that you have the random daily heroic, you will have these gear requirements because raiders don't want to waste their time helping someone gear their alt or playing with someone that's clearly unprepared. Someone with a low gear score, someone that may be new to the game, someone who doesn't know what they're doing. They don't want to waste their time with that. They just want to get it done as quickly and efficiently as possible. They have no incentive whatsoever to help people out. They have no incentive whatsoever to play with someone that has a low gear score. They have every single incentive to get it done as quickly and efficiently as possible, and that means going with people that have a very high gear score. That's what they create. That's what will happen in Wrath of the Lich King. A lot of people seem to have this belief that the random dungeon fighter or the looking for raid on retail is what killed the social aspect in the game. They didn't. They never have really killed them. The social aspect in WoW died because it wasn't needed. The incentive for socializing with people was no longer necessary. In vanilla and in Burning Crusade, we socialized with people while leveling, for instance, because it was because we had every incentive to do so. It was easier to group up with other people, communicate, sort out what you're doing, how you're doing it, go on a journey together. That made leveling much easier and faster. Then in Burning Crusade and in dungeons in general, you are incentivized to socialize with people because you set the path. The dungeons didn't have necessarily a direct path in vanilla dungeons. Look at BRD or Stratholm or Dire Maul. They didn't necessarily have a direct path, so you needed to sort that out. You needed to worry about crowd controls. You needed to worry about packs of mobs that you may or may not skip. So communication was key. The incentive for people to communicate and socialize with one another was there. And on top of that, the reason you added people on your friends list is because you had every incentive to do so. Because, hey, if you had a good run with someone else, and they did a pretty good job, well, maybe you want to do more runs with that person. But that's no longer the case in Wrath of the Lich King and beyond. The dungeons are easy. They no longer require that. They're straightforward, they're easy, the path is direct. And that certainly changed the way the community plays the game. To the point that even on retail with the mythic dungeons, with the complex paths, crowd control required, it's no longer really about socializing, communicating with other people. It's about using add-ons. You use Raider.io to make your group, and then you use an add-on that shows you the path, a path that's made by other people. You use that path, you may tweak it dependent on your group, but you use a path made by someone else. You really don't communicate with someone else while doing even high-level mythic dungeons on retail, or for the sake of raiding, mythic raiding on retail. That's where the game is at, because the incentive to socialize with one another isn't there anymore. And that's the real issue. That's the problem. Does removing random dungeon finder add anything to the social aspect? No, it does not, because it doesn't fix the fundamental problem as to why people aren't inclined to socialize with one another. They have no incentive to do so, and they have every incentive to spend as little time as possible with people. Removing the random dungeon finder is extremely harmful to the game as a result of that. And it's just a tool. At the end of the day, it's just a tool that serves a particular purpose. Removing it has more direct consequences than just the requirement of Gearscore to join certain groups for the random daily heroic. It has far more severe consequences than that. For leveling 1 to 70, it's just going to kill the leveling scene for 1 to 70. It doesn't help that Blizzard added the 70 boost, that they're going to add the 70 boost in Wrath of the Lich King Classic. But doing that while removing the random dungeon finder means that you have no incentive really to level on your own, because it's going to be a miserable experience. You might use heirloom gear, sure, but why bother with all of that when you can just pay some dollars and get a level 70 boost and get it done, right? No reason whatsoever to bother with leveling on your own unless you're a DK, which, by the way, might create certain issues for the player base in terms of finding DKs, because they're going to have to level on their own. But that's a different problem that we can talk about in the future. However, people no longer have an incentive to bother leveling 1 to 70. Every incentive is to use the level 70 boost. Sure, it is a limit of 1 character per account. Guess what? Make another account. Big fucking deal. Maintain 2 subscriptions. Many people maintain 3, 4, even more subscriptions in Classic World of Warcraft because it's not particularly expensive to do so. So people have every incentive to use a level 70 boost. And then in Wrath of the Lich King for the Wrath dungeons, people will have few incentives to group up with people on their own for the sake of dungeons. They will do it while leveling if they are doing a particular quest run, but there will be far fewer dungeon groups. And what's going to happen as a result of that, people won't socialize, they won't be compelled to make more groups. What they're going to do, really, is they're going to level on their own, they're going to quest on their own, they're going to maybe do 1 dungeon quest run occasionally, and then they're going to get to max level, and then they're going to get whatever gear they can, crafted gear, reputation gear, and then they'll join certain groups that will allow them if they have the Gearscore. Or they'll join crap groups for heroics. That's another issue, the player segregation, because that's really what you're creating here. You no longer have an incentive for people of different skill levels or gear levels or both to play together. That's actually one of the things the Random Dungeon Finder does, because you can't choose who you go with. Sure, you can fill up a party and queue for a random dungeon. That works. But more often than not, when you're trying to do your Random Dungeon Finder, oh, I got 20 minutes, 30 minutes, let me just do my daily hero, get it out of the way, right? Maybe you get a guild or 2, but the chances of you actually getting a full group, not necessarily very high. So you get maybe 1 or 2 people to help you along. You queue up and you get 2 randoms who won't necessarily be on your skill or gear level, but you do it anyway because, yeah, heroics and Wrath are pretty easy. But if you give the people the ability to choose who they're doing their heroics with, they're gonna want the easiest time in the world. This is exactly what happens on retail. You have a significant segregation in the player base between different kinds of players, and it's not just like, oh, the top tier players and the weak players. No, it's very different levels dependent on your item level, raider IO, what have you. And that's exactly what's going to happen in Wrath of the Lich King. It's not just going to limit itself to 4K Gearscore, by the way. It's going to go even higher because Old War, 4K Gearscore is about the item level. Just to be clear on this, 4K Gearscore is about what you can get with next level gearing. With Old War, it's 4.6K, 4.5K, 4.4, and it's likely going to increase. It won't stop at 4K. It will go up with TOC, maybe over 5,000. And if you look at ICC, the highest gear score I think is somewhere around 6K, 6.2, 6.4K, something along those lines, that you can get the highest possible gear score. I'm sure it's not necessarily going to get that insane for the sake of forming groups, though it wouldn't surprise me if certain groups actually do that for a random daily heroic, because it makes it easier, it makes it more convenient, and every incentive that the player has is going in that direction. They have little incentive to bother with people that don't have their gear level. And that's the problem with removing the Random Dungeon Finder. That's the issue when Blizzard doesn't know what they're doing, or they don't have the necessary developers in the Classic team to make good decisions, and they outsource it to content creators or whoever they outsource it to. Clearly they're listening to certain people, not necessarily the right ones. So ultimately, all this discussion about Random Dungeon Finder, it's just going to have a negative impact, even on the social aspect, funnily enough. The very thing that Blizzard is actually trying to resolve, it's just going to blow back in their face. Because the player base doesn't care, and every incentive in the game goes against socializing. Costin here, signing out. Don't forget to subscribe and like the video. If you enjoy my content, join my Discord, donate via PayPal or Patreon if you're so inclined. I would very much appreciate it. And stay tuned for more.